I received a question the other day in response to the script related to the video on religious freedoms. The question was this: I've heard that China disallows you to proselytize minors, meaning you can't even convert your own child to your faith, and they need to be 18 and make their own decisions according to the claim-made re-Chinese law. What's your knowledge about this, if you don't mind? Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China, and of course, I'm Jerry. I'd like to thank Kevin Wayne from my Medium.com following for this great and very politely worded question. I did write to Kevin an extensive answer in response, but I felt it was something that I should put onto Jerry's Take on China as well, because the answer is no, it's not true at all. Religious freedom, as the article and video says, and supported by a link to the Constitution, is constitutionally guaranteed in China. I've asked several people for their thoughts on this, and I've checked the legal statutes online. Legally, there's nothing to discuss at all. It's allowed. End of story. Societally, there seems to be a slightly different view. When I asked my wife, her first words were rather loudly, "Of course you can't force a kid who doesn't really know what they're thinking to follow a religion. They must be 18 and make their own decisions." She went on, "What about their human rights? Must they be forced to believe something they don't understand?" It's a fair point. My wife, as I've mentioned before, is a Buddhist. She discovered Buddhism in her late 40s and feels it was the correct time for her. But several other people I've asked, all Chinese, have borne out her opinion on this. Kids should be allowed freedom of choice when they're mature enough to choose. So what about kids in church? I can attest kids go in and out of church all the time. I've been there and I've seen it. Catholic churches do baptisms, confirmations, first confessions, and Holy Communion. Again, I've seen some of this with my own eyes. However, as with all things about China, there is a skerrick of truth which is either misinterpreted, misrepresented, or just misinformation. And this one is no exception. All schools, including private or internationally owned schools, are forbidden to teach religion. And so people outside of China who want to paint China as evil do so by telling evangelists, particularly US evangelists, who seem to be so gullible, that children aren't allowed religion. There's even a statute they can call upon to prove their point. There is a law forbidding religion in school and forbidding enforcing others to believe your God, proselytizing. At age 18, any student can choose a seminary, Islamic institution, or theological college, many of which exist in China. I don't like to use Wikipedia as a source, but there's a list there of all the religious training institutes in China, and it's a long list. Now, let's think about the logic of the claim that children are forbidden. The same people who say this will tell you that China controls the church and chooses what priests are allowed to say, right? And if that were true, think about these three facts. Surely children would be the most susceptible and easily influenced by a priest, a vicar, or an imam. Most children go to church with their parents and they trust their parents, so they would automatically trust the people their parents trust, and that would be religious leaders. Those trusted religious leaders who are enforced by this evil dictatorship to say what they want to say. So why on earth would China not encourage people to go to church from an early age, to be indoctrinated into obedient little servants of a God which they would have you believe is subservient to the party? The fact is, none of that is true. Religious freedom means exactly that. The party doesn't control the sermons. What it does, like anywhere else in the world, is that it has laws that can't be breached or shouldn't be. Religious leaders can't encourage anti-state ideals. They can't encourage violence, sedition, or terrorism. They aren't allowed to break or encourage others to break any laws that affect the harmony of society and they are encouraged to support a harmonious and helpful congregation. And if we think about it, there shouldn't be a need to have laws to encourage people who follow God's laws. But let's be honest, almost every war in history has been started due to religion, and particularly Chinese history. Many of the horrific things that have occurred use God, Jesus, or Allah as justification. And this goes back a long way further than the issues of Xinjiang's Uyghur Muslims. Take a look at the Muslim rebellion of 200 years ago, then the Boxer Rebellion and the Taiping Rebellion. These were all religious based. Although the Boxer is a lot more complicated, it was assuredly Christian converts who were involved in inciting and leading the insurrection. Taiping was less complicated because it was a disillusioned man who failed civil service requirements, then decided that he was the brother of Jesus and therefore another son of God. Given the history and what the Allied nations, often using God as their justification, did to China, and the tens of millions of deaths caused by religious belief, it's hardly surprised that there's some degree of control, but there's no restriction on following the Pope, Allah, Buddha, or believing in your own gods. Please help me to share this. Like, share, subscribe, and get this message out, because everything you're reading about China is wrong. Everything you're seeing about China is wrong. I'm just trying to put that right. Please help me to do that. And thanks once again for listening to Jerry's Take on China. And thank you, Kevin, for the question.